When is the last time you listened to a podcast about web development, web design, and small business and didn't fall asleep? Yes, we cover web development, web design, and small business, but like actual human beings with personalities. If you're a beginner, we're not going to talk over your head. It's more like asking your buddy for help. We have guests, we have fun, and let me tell you, these two can get off on a tangent. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to HTML All the Things Podcast. This is Matt Lawrence and Mike Coran.
That's right, everybody. We are back. This is the HTML All Things Podcast. This episode is titled Lessons I've Learned from Managing a Team of Developers. So today, Mike is going to talk about his recent experience of just what it says, managing a team of developers. He's going to talk about some of the lessons he's learned, how to guide the staff, what's too hands-on, what levels do you hire, junior, senior, can we make mistakes or should we be avoiding them, et cetera, all that good stuff. So if you're interested in management at all at your job, or you're thinking like, maybe management is for me, maybe I should shoot for that in my corporate ladder if that's available at your job, this is the episode for you. So if that sounds interesting to you and you want to support the show, you can go check us out on that Patreon, leave a review or rating on your podcast app, join us in our Discord server, or share this with your friends. And remember that we also have a Scriba affiliate link if you want to learn with their interactive media player code editor, where you can see the instructor go through something like CSS, for example. You might go, hang on, that's not how I thought that worked. You can pause, you can go into the code live, play with the code, break it, see what's up, and you're like, oh, okay, that's what they're doing. Press play, and the lesson will continue. Pretty cool. Go check that out. Link will be in the show description, as well as on htmlallthethings.com in the show notes. But without further ado, Mike, tell us about your experience and what you've learned managing a team of developers.
Yeah, for sure. So I think just to get into it a little bit, I just want to talk about my role, like what I've been doing for the past, I think it's been a couple of years now. And just to give everyone an idea of my experience level there. And I what I want to get out of this episode is not just like, hey, this is how you manage a team, right? I want to give like a general overall view of what managing is, what a happy team is. If you're going into a new team, like if you're just starting at your path as a developer, what it might look like for you, right? Like, so what managers are seeing from their point of view, that might give you a better insight into some of the decisions they make, some of the different paths you take, and maybe it can give you also a decision on like, hey, is this a good situation for me? Is this a bad situation for me? Because I like to think that I'm trying to do my best to make it better for the developers that I work with. It's probably not always the case. Like I'm not perfect in any way, shape, or form, but that's my goal. I've been in situations where that's not been the case for me. So I'm trying to do kind of the opposite of those situations. So I just want to give everyone an overview from a different perspective, I think. Like this podcast talks a lot from the developer's perspective, from someone just getting into the industry. I want to shift the focus. I want to shift the focus a little bit. I want to talk from a place that I have a good experience in. And from there, I'm hoping it can translate to someone, even if they're just coming in, to be more mindful of the situation and maybe strive to this direction. Like maybe they want to be managers. Maybe they don't, and that's fine too. We had a recent episode where we discussed like the different levels of developer in your career and how like different roles require different skill sets. And if you go to a role that has more management, like a team lead, versus a role that has more like, infrastructure knowledge, like a staff engineer or a principal engineer, like those are different paths for you to take in your career that could mean that you're going to manage more people or you're going to manage less people. Not every developer should strive to be a manager, right? Like that's not how the path should work. Even though unfortunately in some companies, they don't realize that, because like the traditional path for everyone in business, quote unquote business, is like you start somewhere and then you eventually become a manager, and that's when you make your big money. And some companies have that mindset with developers as well, where like they won't give you a big raise until you get to the role where you're managing people, which, you can argue isn't particularly the best use of some developers' time. Like a good developer isn't necessarily going to translate to become a good manager, right? And it could be the other way around too. Like, well, actually, the other way around kind of inherently makes sense. If you're a manager and not a developer, you're probably not going to be able to go back to being a developer or something like that. So there's a lot to consider here. There is a lot to like inherently know about the people you're working with. And even if you're not a manager, I think some of these suggestions that I have, some of these lessons that I've learned can help you just be a better team member and maybe, put yourself forward to be in a leadership position.
I do want to kind of unpack what you just said, though, because if you just think of any other job off the top of your head, and I'm sure there's exceptions to this rule, to be clear, but many other jobs, if you just get started, you're sort of doing the grunt work on the front lines, if you will. You're doing the grunt work. Usually it's the junior work, the easy work, and you sort of slowly work your way up to more and more difficult tasks to the point where you're at the point of a single person's productivity max. You as a single person working there are doing or are capable of doing the hardest tasks. So in the case of a developer, you're doing the most difficult development tasks, you're doing the troubleshooting, maybe you're even interacting with other roles like the DevOps team, the marketing team, even things like that. And you're sort of balancing the most difficult tasks. But at that point, it's like, okay, what's the next step? And it makes sense to go into management because management is the next step up in productivity where you are now influencing more than just yourself, right? Because you work your way up to being the most productive person you can as an individual. Once you're at that maximum, what is the next step? And that holds true for marketers and SEO specialists. I mean, welders, if we want to pull it out of tech and tech adjacent things, it does make sense to say, okay, this person has reached maximum personal potential. Now they're going to use those skills to manage all the people that are doing sort of that grunt work on the front lines. That does make sense. What's interesting about the development field, and I'm sure this happens in other places as well, but I only really have insight into the development field right now, is that I hear people say, I have a really big passion for coding itself, the actual writing of the code and making sure the programs work and the bug fixes and, troubleshooting and everything that comes with coding something up. I have a passion for that. And it's crazy to me to think of a day in which I would not code. But at the end of the day, you can only code so much. And assuredly, different softwares like AI and things can make you more productive, but they also make the workforce more productive in general. So it does kind of come down to what else is there, right? So I'm not necessarily really going to fault businesses for saying like, hey, if you want the next pay raise after you've kind of gone through, say, junior through senior, if senior is the maximum in this particular company, management is the next step. Like that does make the most sense to me anyway. Like Mike, like you and I have had conversations in the past where we go, okay, what's our plan? And I even told you, I was like, I think this was maybe 5 years or 6 years into our business, but I was like, I could see if we, start doing really well or something and we have like a lot of clients or one of our websites take off or something that like I could see my role no longer being in tech effectively. Like I'm managing sort of the technical staff and I have technical insights and I guess I'm a technical manager, but I'm not in tech as in I'm not going in and being like, should we use Webflow? Should we use custom? I'm not doing those sort of on the front line, I'm a cog in the machine work tasks anymore. I'm sort of saying the next thing we need is this type of site. Who has the solution? And I'm asking the developers, I'm asking the marketers those questions, and then I'm making the decisions. Like I could see myself doing that, but I get the sort of passion side of things. So I guess my overall point is that I don't really necessarily fault businesses for having this be the path for more money, be the career path if you're not hopping jobs and you're staying in one place. I don't really fault them for it, but maybe there's a middle ground somewhere. I don't really know if there is.
I agree with you for the most part, but there is a middle ground in development specifically, and there might be in other fields as well. But in development, I can tell you what it is. Like I mentioned, staff engineers and principal engineers. That's a different path to management, but they, in traditional tech or in big tech, will get paid almost as much or even more than managers. I've spoken to some staff engineers and principal engineers at large companies in the FANG realm that are making, under $1 million in total compensation. That's big money. That's big money for a non-manager role. I should be very specific. You're not a CTO, you're not in the C-suite, you're not a vice president. You're just an engineer at that point. The reason that they make that money and the reason that this is a different step and you're not so much a cog anymore, this aligns with your vision, Matt, where these staff and principal engineers know the systems around themselves so well, because there a lot of times these massive companies have hundreds of systems that they're using, maybe thousands, right? they know the interconnections between the systems so well that when a new system has to be put in place, right? Like a new app, a server infrastructure, whatever, you need someone that has the intricate knowledge of all the connections and all the architecture to be able to put an architecturally designed software project started. Like you need someone that knows that, okay, you're going to have to connect to this part of the AWS infrastructure. You're going to have to connect to this, databases. You're going to have to connect it to here. And like, they'll draw you the diagram. They'll essentially like plan it from an architectural perspective, give it to a project planner. The project planner will probably do it more meticulously for the developers, and then the developers will go and build it. Like a principal engineer doesn't do much coding other than helping debug and helping implement very complex systems. They're more like architecting at that point, like really like designing more than anything. And that requires a different level of understanding of the systems. Usually these people have been there for a decade, 2 decades. Like these people maybe have been there from the beginning. Like a lot of times the initial engineers will then be promoted to staff engineers to keep them there. And again, these massive salaries are there because if they leave, you're losing such a massive brain potential, so much information that it would require like 10 developers to replace, or maybe not even replaceable. You might have to rewrite some stuff. Like that's a legitimate consideration at that point when a seasoned staff engineer leaves. So they have to be compensated crazily. So there is that potential. But having said that, how many of these people are there at each company? Very few. I'm not sure, Mike. It is more competitive than getting into a management.
And it sounds like it's more tailored toward companies that are larger as well.
Yeah.
A smaller company, even if there's, say, 10 or 20 developers, would most likely, without me having done a study or anything, but in my mind, it would be most likely to have that you go from junior to senior, maybe to tech lead, and then to manager of the developers underneath. Like there is no staff engineer after manager. It's just like you're now the people person.
Correct. Yeah. And that's a good point too, is like when you become a manager, that's kind of taking you off that path to become a staff, right? Like because a manager it's just a different role. Like you kind of start losing your coding ability a little bit, and like you start learning the basic, like how to get the most out of your team, how to make sure your team's happy, stuff like that. That is a completely divergent path from staff engineer. And you're right there too, where smaller companies, startups, including the one that I'm working at right now, we don't have a staff engineer, and we probably won't for a while. But if we graduate from a small company to like a medium-sized company, that's when you can start considering maybe there's a reason for a staff. Because again, like at our company right now, we have 4 or 5 apps being built all under one system, all interconnected together. If in 10 years there's 100 apps all interconnected together, you're going to need someone that knows how that whole system works. And again, that's when the staff makes sense. But early on, 100%, no staff engineers. The only way to go up is through the seniority rankings of a developer. So if you're a senior developer, that might be the top for you in a startup. And then you might have to just eat it, go to another company, or become a manager. So with that being said, I've already kind of described my role a little bit, but I am working for a startup. We have in total, we have about 24 employees. On the development team, we have like 5 devs, including myself, plus a couple contractors that we use on the dev team. So in total, like 7 people. I'm managing 6 people. So it's a small team. I don't have too much experience managing anything larger. I've managed a team of 3 before, so this is a little bit of a step up. And I'm not only part of the like management or like just like leading the team, I'm also part of the hiring process as well. Like I try to find people and bring them in and interview them and set up the entire interview cycle and stuff like that. So I have some understanding from that perspective. Just to give everyone an idea, I don't have an understanding from managing a huge corporation. I still do a lot of coding myself. My split right now is probably like 70-30, 60-40, where 60% I'm coding or 70% I'm coding, 30 to 40% I am managing or doing like, team meetings and lead meetings. So that's where I'm at. But I do have a lot of perspectives from that way. And I am enjoying this role right now. Having said that, I personally don't think that I would enjoy a role where I would become more of a manager than a developer. Like if it ever splits where I'm like doing 40% development and 60% management, that's when I think this would start falling apart for me. Because like mentioned, I'm a fan of the actual keys and like hands on the keyboard. I like the technical aspect. I like managing a team. I like making developers around me better, but I want to be part of the process of actually developing the stuff. I want to be involved. I want to be hands-on, and we'll see. Like, that might change with age. That might change with time and stuff like that. I'm not ruling it out, but for now, I'm in the place where I am content, and I'm enjoying building a team that is all passionate about the project that we're working on or projects, and trying to make sure that their lives are as easy as possible so that we can kind of move forward. Okay, now to just jump into the lessons that I've learned, right? So I've been doing this I've been a team lead at 3 different startups now, technically, and I've been doing it for probably 5 or 6 years, managing small teams. One of the probably most important lessons that I've learned is how to spot burnout, right? This is something that's talked about a lot in our industry, which is good, right? But I feel like it's talked a lot, but not acted upon, especially by management and by like leads and by the companies that are hiring devs as much. And it's a shame because I've seen the effects of not taking burnout signs clearly and seriously, and how that affects the end result of a project, right? Not only, let's talk about it from like a capitalistic perspective, just the bottom line of the company. From my perspective, I want to think about it as a person, but a lot of companies, when you're talking to management, when you're talking to leadership, you have to understand that they're capitalist structures, that you need to speak to them on a level of like, hey, if we don't implement these rules for a person, like not having to answer the phone on weekends, not like allowing them to take vacations, if we don't implement these rules, it's going to affect your bottom line. Like your products will suffer. That's the kind of conversation you have to have with leadership, especially leadership that is much more focused on money, to get the point across so that you can allow your team the benefit of not being burnt out. Because it's very, very easy to implement policies that burn people to a crisp, like very easy in the development space, right? Like if the project manager that's working with you isn't technical, doesn't understand how to break up tasks properly, and thinks that something is easy. Like everyone hates that word, but like that's like a project manager sometimes will use it to signify that, hey, this needs to be done quickly and it's easy, right? Like it's easy. And he'll just keep saying that to the team. That alone can cause burnout, because as soon as someone has a hiccup and they're not able to get that easy task done, I say easy in quotes, they start thinking badly about themselves. They start going to the spiral of like, I can't get it done, so now I have to work more on it. So now they're not sleeping, et cetera, et cetera. Just a small little thing, just someone saying it's easy. And you have to learn how to spot that. You have to learn how to see that in people. You have to learn, if you're the team lead, right? You're not the project manager. You are still going to be interacting with project managers. You need to stop them from doing that to your dev team. Being like, hey, you're doing this wrong. You're breaking up these tasks incorrectly. You're burdening the team with too many large tasks that aren't easy, and you're telling them that it is. It's going to burn them out, right? Like that's your role as a team lead in that sense, to stop them from burning your team out. That's just one little example. I'll get into a couple more.
I do have a question there. So obviously, as not necessarily the team grows, but as the company grows and the team at large, I suppose. So all the departments are sort of growing, and a company becomes like a monolith, like a really large company. Obviously, individual policies, meaning those that are tailored to the individual, are just not going to be passed down from the top. They're general policies that, this one's for marketing, this one's for development, this one's for whatever, kind of roughly there. And I suppose my question is like, so right now you're at a startup that isn't too large, as you said. And so you can have sort of these individualist policies to an extent. However, the sort of devil's advocate of it is, if we set a general policy like the big companies, so we take a very generalist policy, let's say something like, that's it, no more messing around. Everyone must answer their Slack or their phone within 20 minutes of getting a message. Full stop, period. I don't care who you are. You can be the junior dev. You can be a senior manager. That's what comes down from the top. Okay. So now you're a startup, and those type of policies, or you're in a startup, and those type of policies don't necessarily really, get made generally, but they could, right? They could be made. So right now, because you only have a few staffers, you're able to sort of tailor to each individual person to an extent. The devil's advocate angle would be that your team may not be as agile because they're not adhering to a policy that you've decided is the best. So if you've decided that the best policy is everyone must answer within 20 minutes of a message or call, period, full stop, or there will be some sort of punishment for that, and that burns out 5 of, say, your 10 developers. How many developers did you say was under you again? Sorry.
There's 7 of us in total, so 6.
Okay, so there's 6 people under you. So let's just say, we'll split it in half. We'll just say 3 developers are going to be affected by that, and you get affected by burnout. The devil's advocate would say, get rid of the 3 and hire 3 that will do that. Why would you keep someone around when you have to tailor to them? Clearly, they're not a good fit. So obviously, that's a really cutthroat way to handle things, a very capitalist nature, a very sort of high-level management nature, which is why many startups don't have policies like that, because A, they need staff, and they can't be going through, thousands and thousands, because they're not getting, not necessarily getting thousands and thousands of applicants. But at the same time, they want to, kind of have like a bit of a friendly culture where if they go on a trip or something for a team building exercise, you don't have one guy that's like terrified of all the people that are one level above him because he's burnt out or whatever. So there's like some tailoring going on in these smaller companies is my point, right? What would you say to the devil's advocate where they say, well, if you want to grow, you should be implementing these extremely strict policies. You decide that the 20-minute answer rule will boost your productivity by 40%. These 3 people don't make the cut. Get rid of them. Get 3 more. What do you say about like that cutthroatness? Is that something that you think would help a startup actually grow faster? Do you think that that's something that is just a side effect of a company being super large? What do you think about that sort of opposite devil's advocate sort of take?
Okay, so there's a couple things. The idea that a person can say that if you don't answer your message after 20 minutes, this is going to affect 40% of our productivity. Like, they can say that, like, whatever, they're the manager, they're the owner, whatever. That doesn't mean it's true. Just want to clearly point that out. Like, most likely it's not, right? Most likely what they're saying is complete bullshit. They're just making it up out of their ass. They can implement it. That's their prerogative. They're the owner of the company. They're the manager, whatever, right? That doesn't mean it's going to be successful. Okay. And they can be cutthroat. Again, up to them. They own it. They pay the salaries, and they can cut half staff every time something fails. The fact that you've cut half staff this time, right, and then hired another 5 people, doesn't mean that the older staff isn't going to get burnt out a month later. So you might have to cut the older staff now next time. So you might have to continually go through this process of continually cutting staff that don't meet your criteria because they're being burnt out. And most likely that's the case. You might get 1 or 2 people that are psychos and like the craziness, and that's maybe what you're aiming for. But the reality is to scale a team and to build it in a way that actually supports the company and makes for a better product and a faster development cycle, it's going to do the opposite. Your method of trying to burn a person to the ground to see if they can stand it will, sure, you'll get some diamonds out of that coal, right? Like when you put the pressure down, but most likely, it's not going to be a 50% cut. It's going to be a gradual 80, 90% cut as you start implementing these policies. And then you'll be rehiring. And that process of hiring devs into a team will make that team slower and slower and slower, because now you're removing the people that have all the knowledge of the code. You're constantly putting stuff in flux for the architecture of everything. You're never getting a project done without firing someone. Like, all of that is going to have severe negative implications on anything that you're working on, to a point where your company's probably going to fail, which is why most companies don't implement those crazy policies in that sense. They'll implement them in certain situations. They'll implement them for certain teams, and sometimes they'll fail, sometimes they'll succeed. But as a company policy, you won't see that very often. And not because they don't want to, because you're right. There's some people that are just hardcore like that, and they want to burn people to the ground. That's their way of management. You're 100% correct. But they've done it and they failed at it. And now they're realizing that they have to go to some sort of middle ground where they need to keep people at least somewhat tolerable situation, so that they're not losing 50%. They're losing only like 10, 15%, 20%. That's what the hardcore companies aim for, by the way. So like a company like Facebook or Meta, whatever they're called, their goal is to remove the bottom 10% of developers every year or something like that, right? Like they will put these kinds of policies in place sometimes to burn those people out. Their mindset is exactly like yours. But even with them, their policies aren't as crazy to the point where, like, again, 50% get burned out. So it's happening in the industry. What you're saying is happening. It's just not as crazy, Do I agree with that method? No. Like, I think there is a better way to implement it. But from my perspective, I've only done small startups. I don't know. That's why I want to be very clear with my role, like where I'm at, is that like I can give you my opinion on that and what I think might happen, but I've never managed a team of that big, so I could be 100% wrong.
Yeah, and to be clear, I'm playing devil's advocate. It's not that's not my opinion. Like, I don't think that we should be implementing like super extreme policies or anything. But like a policy that, seems innocent enough coming down from the top, hitting a team could be, obviously the 20-minute thing is pretty extreme, but having something like you must answer your phone at all times, that's a little bit of a more liberal policy than saying every 20 minutes. There's not sort of a hard limit in there, but that could destroy somebody. It could be like pretty bad. And then it kind of comes down to the individual managers. And then if like they get audited or something, it's like, oh, you're not implementing my policies. And, all then the office sort of politics and bureaucracy potentially take over. But I see what you're saying is like, you're not in that type of situation at the moment. So you haven't been a 2,000 person corporation or something where, someone comes down from the top and just says, all right, get rid of these 100 people. I told them to do this. They didn't do it by, really cutthroat. Obviously that's generally not happening in startup culture, at least not that we hear about.
Yeah, exactly. And when your company grows, I think from my perspective, you should try to keep as much of the startup culture as you can on the development side. As you scale, obviously you'll have more responsibilities for like security, and you'll have more responsibilities for infrastructure and documentation and all that. So it's going to inherently slow you down from building new features, new products, and you'll have to be maintaining older ones. But if you kind of start creating these monolithic development teams, what'll start to happen is there will be this really, really slow movement process of everyone having to have a say in every little part of your structure. And so instead of, planning a feature, getting feedback and building, you'll go through 10 different meetings before a feature is even in the process of being designed and built out. And that'll take, almost twice as long as it took you to build the feature when you were a startup. So you need to have a middle ground there when you're starting to grow. You need to split out your teams into smaller teams so that you don't have like more than, 3 or 4 or 5 developers on a team. Try to keep that kind of small culture, startup mindset going in places where you can. Some places you can't. Like I said, maintaining a piece of software and building a piece of software are two very different things and require very different skill sets, mindsets, everything. And sometimes you do need that corporate structure to kind of shift into that mode of maintenance. But a lot of times, if you're trying to build something new, if you're trying to innovate, and that's kind of the goal of all of these massive companies, you need to provide your developers and your teams the ability to do that. So it's another aspect of this that, again, I haven't gone through myself yet, but as a team lead, if we do ever grow to that size, I will be pushing for that kind of culture. So with burnout, I think, like, again, the signs are all the same. So you got to make sure that nothing has severely changed in your team member. Sometimes burnout happens without them noticing it. But the real big sign of it is that if you're doing things that you like to do before and now they feel like a chore, and you can tell this with like, velocity of their task completion. You can tell this with how you just them talking to you about the tasks that they usually liked. If they're starting to get to the point where it's like it's a chore and it's becoming kind of like annoying to do these normal tasks, that's when you have to start worrying about it. This is a big one for at least that I've experienced personally and recently, where like a member on the team was just he was very enthusiastic early on, and that's normal. They just kind of slowly got ground down a little bit by different managements and different stuff like that. And then they weren't getting to the point where they were like angry at anything, but you could tell they weren't as in it. You can always tell when a mood shifts. It's gradual, but it does happen. And that's when you're like, okay, you have a sit down with them and you're like, okay, listen, you need to take some time off. Plan a vacation. Don't work on the weekends. Like, our policy is like, you don't need to work on weekends, period. Like, I've implemented that on my team. Don't work on weekends. I've said that like multiple times in multiple meetings. My team will work on weekends sometimes. Like, they'll just take a Saturday and do some coding for work. And that's great. And like, I mean, I've done that too. Like, it's not a crazy thing, but the reality is that actually, even though you think you like it and like everyone is like super excited about the features that they're building, doing that on a consistent basis will burn you out, just flat out, no matter what you think, no matter how excited you are about whatever you're building. So when I see someone do that like 2 weekends in a row, I will have a conversation with them about it and be like, listen, you need to take like the weekend off. Like this is the weekend. Like you're not being paid for this. Like I don't know what you're doing. We have those frank conversations sometimes where it's just like, play a game, go out and like do something. And that usually like works and makes them a little bit more refreshed for the week because they actually took some time off. I guess people might call it a good thing to have people that are passionate on your team that want to do this and want to work so much. But on the other side of it is like, yeah, but again, you have to take care of yourself and the company will be fine for those 2 days that you're not working. Like there's not, like those 2 days aren't going to change the course of the feature that you're building. Like just take the time off. You need to worry about yourself. Like sometimes there will be crunch time, maybe, or maybe it might make sense to work on weekends. We haven't had that really yet, but it might happen. And, then we'll compensate you and all that and like it'll be fine. But it's a weird situation. I always appreciate it, but it's just how it is. You have to be careful with it.
There is like that weird situation too, where, I mean, you and I have had this conversation with people in the community before where they go, hey, like my company has a no work on weekends policy, or sometimes there's even laws in place, like, right to disconnect is a common way that people phrase it, where sometimes they're literally not allowed to log in on weekends unless they're under a certain type of role type that's on call or whatever, right? Whatever the local jurisdiction's laws are in place for that type of thing. We've had people complain about that where they go, all I do is code anyway. I may as well get my work project done. Because if I don't do my work project, I'm literally just going to go home and then work on some other project that I'm working on. And all they do is code anyway. And those are sort of the edge cases where that's hard to kind of manage, I would imagine, because it's just like, what do you say to that person? But I mean, we see that in other things too. If we watch a YouTuber that's like a gamer and then they game and record it for YouTube, and then on the weekend, when they're not doing that, assuming they have a sort of standard 5-day schedule, then they just game on the weekend. And then it becomes like, what are you doing type thing. I don't know how to deal with that. I just kind of wanted to bring it up because I know that absolutely has come up in our community. And anyone sitting there now listening to this going like, well, I'm just going to be coding anyway, or listening to Syntax, or listening to our podcast, or listening to whatever, all coding related. I don't know how to help that because I'm not that type of person, right? But that is an edge case that managers would have to deal with.
Yeah, exactly. And like, again, there's not much I can do. Like I can't stop it. And I don't want to stymie them to be like, you must not work on the weekends no matter what. Like I don't want to put that kind of policy in place because some people literally legitimately enjoy it. The only thing I can do is just be aware that it's happening and try to push them to at least stop doing that on a consistent basis. You know what I mean? Like I want them to have time off and breaks and like, again, vacations. We have a very generous vacation policy. I kind of have to push people to take it. The other thing you can do as a manager is to take time off yourself. I try to take time off here and there to make sure that everyone on my team knows that you're allowed to do that. I know in some companies that they implement these like infinite vacation policies and that no one takes vacation, especially not the top management. So like people are like, well, if they're not taking vacation, I can't take vacation. That's the scam of infinite vacation, is that no one has to pay you for any of it. And like, if no one's taking it, then is there actually infinite vacation? No. But as long as your management is willing to take vacation, as long as the top level people are taking it, usually that'll trickle down. So that's another thing you can do to kind of avoid burnout on your team, is you yourself take vacation. Next thing here I have is give as much ownership as you can. So again, luckily working at a small startup, we don't have a lot of developers. There's only a few of us here, like 6, and we have a lot of projects that we want to work on. So I've been put in a situation where I can hire people that I think can have ownership of systems and I can give them that ownership. So right now, like every single one of our devs is kind of owning an app. Like they're in charge of that app. Now we will sometimes shift, and like if that app needs to be out, someone will join them, including myself. Like I'll join them, but they're the owner of that app. So they have the understanding of what's going on, what's the next thing that needs to be built, how these systems work together, right? Like we decide this from a high level together, but they're the ones implementing it hands-on. So when you join someone, you're kind of looking to them as the leader and giving someone that kind of, again, that push to lead a little bit, to take ownership of a system has been hugely beneficial that I've noticed. Like most people will be super happy with it because, again, they're making their own decisions a lot of times. They're bouncing them off me sometimes, they're bouncing them off each other. But a lot of times they're making their own decisions. They're choosing how to implement things. We have we're all in it together from the sense of like, hey, this is the stack that we're using, but there's many different ways to implement different things. And when stuff happens, like when a release happens, everyone knows that this person is in charge of the release. Everyone knows that they should be getting the kudos because they put in a ton of time and effort into it. And that kind of feedback loop comes in from the company to the person, from the team to the person. And like seeing a product that you owned from start to finish to actually release, it's a really cool experience in a company. Like you can do it yourself, obviously, on a small scale. Like you can build your own little app or SaaS business. And that's something that's also really cool. And I highly encourage people that are starting out to do that. But when you do it in a company, when you have many stakeholders all contributing their information, you all agree on a path forward, and then you're the one in charge of like getting it done. And then it's done and out. It's hard to explain, but it's just kind of what I try to push for everyone to experience, because I think that makes you a better developer. Having that mindset of like, I did this, I can do it again, will push you to become better and to learn more and to take more ownership. Again, I use ownership a lot on the team. I use ownership a lot, maybe on this podcast, even I've talked about it a couple of times, but that's the mentality, especially in a startup, that is like crucial. That if you don't have that, like, I want to get this done because it's a cool thing, like I want to see it done, it's probably not going to get done in a startup, because there's just so many different little factors that will get in your way, that if you're there to just like get the tickets done and not ask any more questions outside the tickets, it's not going to work. Like it's just not going to work in a startup. I want to be very clear here. In a new startup environment, when something matures, and again, it comes into that maintenance factor, that's when the tickets start coming in. That's when a more like, okay, I'm just here to do the tickets kind of mentality can start sitting in. And some people like that better, and that's fine. There's jobs like that available. I'm just being very clear that in a startup, it's not probably going to work. Okay, next thing here, onboarding is crucial. So I found that in any job that I've joined, onboarding has been kind of severely lacking, is a very nice way of putting it. Usually you're given some safety documentation, some whatever company policy crap, and then just like, here's our system, here's the code base, here's a task or something like it. Very loose system, some documentation and all that. And like usually it's like, hey, fill out some documentation for the first part, maybe update our documentation with anything that you find. That's some of your first tasks or something, very generic. I've taken onboarding a little bit more seriously and way more hands-on. So in all of the developers that we've hired since I started, I was the first developer hire. Every developer that I've hired after that, I've been I don't sit with the person and watch them code. I don't do that because that I think is crazy. What we do is like the first day that they're there, I go through with them on a call all of the, development environments. I get them to spin them up. I look at how they spin them up. I correct them. I give them the right files. I tell them where the documentation is lacking. I tell them all these little tricks that I've learned, and we do that together. I make sure that they're set up, and then I give them based on their level, I give them a task, like a small task that I think they should be able to do. I don't give them the pressure of like, hey, I think this task should be able to be done in a couple hours. I never say that. I'm like, hey, this, you might do it fast, you might do it long. Don't sweat the timeline that you want to do this task. The goal of this is for you to like understand the code base. So where to make the change to get to this, it might be just like a text change. It might be like a little styling change or whatever, where like, just to get them used to this flow of like, hey, I need to understand where to put what. And then I kind of step away and I let them go and do their thing. And I'll check in with them the next day and see how it's going. And if they need some more guidance, I'll get on another call with them and give them that guidance. Like it's a way more hands-on approach than I've ever experienced myself. And I found that the developers have responded pretty well to it. Like we have like feedback sessions, one-on-ones, and like my team reports up to the CTO to give feedback for me. And that's been like one of the top feedbacks is like my onboarding has been really good. I think putting more effort into that process gets a person started the right way. And again, that first step that someone takes in your company, I think is really important because that sets the tone a little bit for what's next. And a lot of times, like based on how they respond to the onboarding, I'll be more hands-on or less hands-on. So I'll be very reactive to it. Not every onboarding isn't the same, no way. And I don't expect it to be. Like I think having like hey, go through these steps one by one approach for everyone is wrong because everyone learns differently. Everyone starts differently. And a lot of times I'm always like, oh, wow, like I can be even less involved in this. That's like 90% of my onboarding. And some of the times where I have to be a little bit more involved has actually been with more senior developers because they found like incorrect processes that I've implemented. And they're like, oh, this should be implemented this way. And then I have to be more involved because I'm correcting those processes, right? Like that's how it's honestly been since I started. So it's a really cool experience to onboard someone, but it's also good to be actually onboarded instead of just thrown into the fire. So I've tried to do that as a manager.
I think the one thing with onboarding as well is it's one of the areas that I've criticized when asked for criticism of my prior employers as well, because sometimes you don't know your role in the company, you don't know how far you're supposed to reach, and so you might sit there kind of in analysis paralysis of, can I reach out to the marketing team for this? Is there a process involved in that? How is that? Because a lot of these processes that are inside of companies are obviously internal and specific. You can't be Googling, hey, am I allowed to contact the marketing team if I'm a developer in X company? That's generally not listed that way. So having a good onboarding process, and like for me anyway, having that sort of newcomer effect UX where you make it clear, like do not, call managers, like call the tech leads first or whatever the process is. Talk to the tech guys, don't talk to these people. If you do need to talk to these people, you have to have a ticket. They're very busy. Whatever the process is, whether it's formal, informal, do you want to instant message? Do you not? All that stuff is really important because otherwise it could be months and months of someone doing something inefficiently and you don't even realize it, it's still getting done. And then you realize months later, you're like, oh my God, they've been doing their timesheets for 3 hours a week. And they're actually just supposed to like go in here and do this, or they're actually just supposed to like print them off from this AI generated thing or like whatever. And so having this sort of onboarding where it shows a specific softwares and the specific processes, like Mike said, with the setting up of the environment, but also knowing their place in the company, knowing where they can reach out, who to call when certain things happen, and knowing also, this is a big one for tech and IT especially though, is knowing severity of things. Like I've definitely been caught off guard by the severity of things where I'll be like trying to get some help with something and someone else is doing something that's more severe, but I have no idea of our severity system, right? And then one day an emergency happens and everyone's running around screaming and yelling and you're like, well, can I help? And it's like, no, shut up. Like we have all this to do. You have never done this before. And it's sort of like, okay, but like it would have been nice for me to have at least even known that there was some sort of like severe emergency level like this, so that I'm at least aware of like, okay, we're in emergency mode. I'm going to observe how people handle the emergency. Not, oh my God, there's an emergency mode. And I've had that in many jobs, even a factory job where there's been an emergency mechanical situation, quite literally, in the middle of the day, but months into my job, and everyone knows what to do. Everyone's sort of taking up positions, but that wasn't a part of my onboarding. It wasn't a part of my training or anything, because obviously it's a rare situation. And that makes me very inefficient in a situation in which you have to be the most efficient that you can be. And so again, knowing your place in the company, knowing what can generally happen, and then all the advice that Mike obviously laid out is really crucial for onboarding.
Yeah. It's something that's been frustrating me for a long time. And again, I don't have a solution that fits all. And I think that's the solution. It's like, you can't treat everyone exactly the same. Go into it with like, I'm going to be hands-on, and then slowly roll yourself back as they become more comfortable, because you don't want to be hovering over them. That's bad. But you also don't want to just like put them into the abyss and just hope that they swim, essentially, which is like a lot of what my onboarding was like. I'm somewhere in between. I'm more leaning towards the hands-on side of things, and then I slowly roll myself back, give them more autonomy, give them more autonomy, give them more autonomy, until the point where like they just do what the other team does. Because we're, again, like our company is remote. That's something I should have mentioned. And we're also mostly asynchronous. So we do have a check-in around 3 to 4 days a week where we get on a 15-minute call, like a stand-up, and we check in with each other. But other than that, all of our communication is done through Slack, and we don't really do a lot of meetings, especially the dev team. And that's very intentional. Like I intentionally stop the dev team from being pulled into meetings because I know that distracts them, that context switches, and it's a legit factor in getting stuff done slower, right? So I'll take a lot of meetings myself. Again, that's where my 40% of my time goes, is to shield the dev team from those meetings. I'll usually still reach out. Like if the meeting does relate to a project that one of the devs is working on, and I think it might be beneficial for them, I will bring them in. but I won't bring like the entire dev team in just to sit on it. I'll bring the owner of that project in. And sometimes I won't do that. I'll just reach out to them and be like, hey, I'll just write down some notes for you. You can continue working. If you want to come in, here's an optional link. Like you can come in. I'm constantly in communication with all the owners of the projects. I'm constantly trying to make sure that they're not being blocked. That's part of the role of a team lead. We talked about what exactly a team lead does in a previous episode, though. Maybe we'll link it in this. Next thing here I have is be available, right? So I just mentioned like, hey, do the onboarding properly. But when onboarding is done, if you just step back and are just like a ghost that disappears into the ether and no one can ask you questions, that kind of sucks. So you need to make sure that you're in a place where you can be reached during work hours and you are able to respond during work hours. Now, this is difficult sometimes because, like I said, I still do coding, so I still need my focus time. So that's why I put my focus time on a calendar so people know, like, hey, first of all, my Slack status changes. Everyone that can book meetings can see my calendar, and they know that I'm going to be slow to respond. I don't tell them to not message me. I'm going to be slow to respond during those times. But any other time during the day, I'll respond. I'll usually leave like a block of time in the mornings for just responding to any questions that come up or just chatting with the developers, making sure that everything's okay, as well as doing code reviews, right? So that's another thing that I'll get into right now, right after this. But yeah, essentially like be available. It seems obvious, but again, I've been in situations where my managers were there, but they weren't really there. Like I could talk to them like once a week, and that sucks. Like, yeah, they're busy. I understand it's tough, but if I have to save all my questions for you until the end of the week or something like that, or you're just not available, I'm going to be way slower at my job because whatever question I have, I'm just going to put it in a docket and then just work on something else, and stuff will get put behind. And I'll also feel disconnected from the role, especially again, in a remote environment. You can feel really isolated and disconnected if someone doesn't respond, if someone is not available to be messaged and stuff like that. So you need to take those things into account. Remote work is different than regular work. That's just the reality. People that tried to switch to remote work, like a company wide, and then treated it as if it was normal in office work failed most of the time. Like you can't treat it that way. It's a completely different beast, and it requires different considerations. Sometimes meaning that you need to put yourself out there more and making sure that you're communicating extra during your time when you communicate on Slack and stuff like that, putting yourself there so that people see you and stuff. Like we've talked about it before, where like communication is half the battle in this situation, where a lot of times developers will get onboarded onto a team and then disappear from Slack and all that, and then come back with with like their code done, but they've never communicated, and now they're 2 steps back because they didn't ask the questions that they should have. So I'm always telling people, just ask questions. If I'm not going to answer it, someone else on the team will answer it. We'll riff on it back and forth. Just being out there, just talking to each other is going to be a beneficial thing.
There is something I want to mention here too, and that is if you are disconnected from your manager, it's really bizarre as well. I remember a role where I actually don't remember my manager's name because they were so disconnected from me that the only thing they ever sent me was, hey, you're supposed to do this timesheet thing. And I had never done any timesheets in any other role there. Apparently that team needed to do it. No one told me that. I was only ever working with tech leads and some other people that I was assisting in projects. And I never really knew the manager. I met him once. It was like a really awkward handshake. I tried to like spark up a conversation. We said about 3 words to each other, and that was it. And I'm pretty sure he didn't know who I was. It was policy if you were sick or something to email the manager. I did that. No one answered it. I didn't show up for a day, and no one knew I wasn't there for a day. And it was just this really awkward, like, okay, like I understand that I am being managed by the tech lead and stuff, which is totally fine. But there's some things that are above the tech lead where the tech lead is not the HR contact, let's say, right? It's sort of like there's some HR stuff that needs to be taken care of. Like, hey, like Matt's not going to be here today. He's sick. So the manager needs to be aware of that. So if HR goes, yo, was he there? No, he wasn't, type thing. And that was just not clear. And the only reason I'm convinced why he contacted me about that timesheet thing is probably because HR or someone above him said, yo, one of your team members isn't doing their timesheets. And then he just was just like, okay. And probably just clicked on my name, didn't even know who I was, and was just like, yo, you need to do this. And that was it. Really bizarre. I mean, I wasn't disconnected from the role necessarily. Like this person was working in a different office. They were remote, whatever. That's fine. But the fact that I literally had more emails to him than had received. And even then it was maybe 4 emails total. Was pretty freaking bizarre, if I'm being honest. And it made me feel very disconnected from, at the very least, the head of the team, I guess you could say. And then I've had the other type where I've had tech leads and the manager involved all the time. They're, at their desk, they're available for call, whatever. And that's way better, significantly better. You know what's going on. The tech lead helps you in the day-to-day where he's like asking you to do things, or in my case, I was a student learning, so he was helping me with the tech, of course, or he would assign someone to me like, oh, he's busy today, so here, you ask questions from this guy. So I know what's going on in the team. He's more intricately, involved with the social construct, let's say, of the team. Whereas the manager, it's like, oh, okay, my college needs this, can you help me with this? Yep, okay, I'll sign this papers, whatever. If I needed papers signed from this other manager that I can't even remember his name, I actually don't know if it would have happened. If I had to do that, if I was still like a student learning in the introductory stages, I sincerely don't know if he would have answered me. He probably would have been, who is this? Probably would have asked that question. So be available and don't be a stranger, because it is extremely bizarre.
Yeah, that's a weird corporate structure right there. Like, luckily in startup culture and startups, that very, very, very unlikely to happen just because of how small everyone feels pretty interconnected. Like, we've just had to start implementing a little bit of, the hierarchy in the last 6 months or so, because we've grown. Like, when I joined, we had 7 employees. Now we're at 24. So like, we've had to start implementing some of the stuff so that people can know who to go to ask for time off and all that, like just the general stuff. But for the most part, we still can all get on a call together and talk to each other. So it's not something that I super relate to, but one thing I can totally get is like that feeling of being a cog. I think what you're experiencing there, where like a manager is not even talking to you or doesn't even know of your existence, there's nothing more like, I'm a cog in this machine. Like, I am the lowest tadpole right now, and I just need to complete my tickets and go home, kind of thing. Like, that's the mentality that manager is putting on you, and that's the mentality that
I'm team member 4.
Correct. Yeah. Like, I am a number to this person, and that is it. So that's the trade-off. Like, if you're gonna be that kind of hands-off manager where you're just gonna not be involved in your teams at all, you're probably gonna give the aspect of like, hey, everyone just do your jobs and then go home, which is fine, again, like, but if you want that more ownership mentality and you want people to actually like their job for the most part and enjoy the work and enjoy the accomplishments that they have together as a team, then you might want to be just a little bit more involved and, helping and stuff like that. Like, it's that classic meme of like the boss and like the team lead, where the person that's a servant manager will be in the front lines, like helping pull the blocks, and the boss will be sitting on a desk above you, telling you where to push the blocks. Like, I personally think that the person on the front lines pushing with the team and helping the team is going to be a way better manager, and it's going to make for a much more successful team because everyone can work together on it. Their problems because you're freaking living in it, and it's a lot easier for you to help solve them and stuff like that. Next thing here is code reviews. This one is super important, and this was probably the one that I sucked at most because I've always been part of smaller teams. I want to say my mentor that taught me a lot of what I know in coding didn't really do too many code reviews with me. He did some for sure, but it was very much like, okay, I could see what you're doing fine, and then he just let me do my thing. I do wish he was a little bit more did do more code reviews. It is time consuming, so I understand why he didn't. He was like transitioning from his role as a manager to CTO and stuff like that. So I understand it, and I still appreciate everything that he taught me. But code reviews was something that I think my skills have been severely lacking for a long time. So this is where I spent a lot of time trying to get better at. And it's not easy. Like, the only way to get better at code reviews is to review code, and it's time consuming. Like, I've gotten to the point where I think I give decent ones. I still probably suck at it, but at least I can point out some major errors and some code structure stuff that I think helps. I am very much a proponent of not nitpicking, right? Like, we have a lint file, we have Prettier installed that formats our code, everything. If something is in the wrong order, if someone's doing something slightly different than how you would do it, I definitely don't write anything there. I don't see the benefit of that. Yes, code conformity, I get it. Everyone's screaming through the monitor or wherever you're listening to this on. code conformity is great, right? But if you have a good linter setup, like if you have good formatting in general in your editor, the little things don't matter. As long as you can read the code, if it's not looking like if file to file looks slightly different, I don't care. I think that instituting a policy where every file has to have the exact same structure and every code base needs to look exactly the same across the board actually slows down teams more than anything, because everyone codes slightly differently. And I don't think that that's a bad thing. Code is fairly readable. We're coding in front end code like JavaScript. It's not that hard to read. Like, we're not doing C, right? Like, I think it would be a little bit different if we were doing like a lower level embedded language where like it is a little bit harder to read and structure is probably way more important. But in what we're doing, again, no nitpicking on my end. I just look for the the big stuff. If something definitely looks wrong, I'll run the code. I'll test it out usually, make sure that there's no glaring errors. I'll test the edge cases that I think can happen, and I will provide that feedback, right? Like, that's what I'm trying to do. That's what everyone on the team is doing. So the other thing that I've implemented is everyone's reviewing each other's code. It's not just me. Whenever everyone's an owner of their own projects, people have different contexts in different projects, but it's important for everyone to know what each other are doing, because, like I said earlier, you need to be able to take time off. If we're not reviewing each other's code and if we don't know what's going on and Joe takes 2 weeks off, how is someone going to maintain that project? And that's something that startups fall into, is this is like thing where no developer can take time off because they own too much. And that's what we're trying to avoid. So we've been pretty good at, again, implementing systems that are similar across the board. So whenever someone leaves, most of the time we can easily maintain it without having to contact them. Like last time, a crucial developer left a couple weeks ago. They left for a full week. We didn't contact them once. A couple of little things that needed to be changed, I handled. No issues, right? Because we did code reviews, we chose the technology together and stuff like that. So it did work. Next thing here is be the shield from unnecessary distractions. So I've already talked about this a little bit. I won't get too far into it, but essentially making sure that my team isn't in unnecessary meetings, making sure that they're not being asked to do things that are outside scope of the project. They're not being bothered by little things like the marketing team asking them to do a one-off like website or something like that for their like landing page for one of their ideas for one of their clients or something. Like, it can happen. Like, the sales team sometimes can overstep, the marketing team can sometimes overstep, and it's the role of the team lead to make sure that that happens minimally and make sure that it goes through you and you can stop it from happening. Like, look at the, like, point to the sign, be like, hey, this is what we're working on. We're not doing your one-off landing page so you can land one extra customer that you think will like this landing page. It's just not going to happen.
I have a question about that, actually. So I remember I was in a situation one time where I was still in my co-op position for school, and I had just someone I had never met in person and never did meet in person reach out to me and just start kind of giving me tasks. And I go to my team and I'm like, I asked, like, I'm not gonna start randomly doing people's work. Am I supposed to do this? And it was a gray area. They weren't really sure. And so they were giving me full-time work and just saying like, well, technically you're this department's co-op, so I guess you have to kind of listen to him. But if you don't do what he says, your manager knows that you're working with us. And it was sort of like, okay, so I kind of did part of his project, but it was a really complex project to the point where when I asked questions, people said that's more R&D, and I actually don't know if that's possible. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm new here. I'm certainly not going to know if this is possible. I'm still learning the structure of this team. So I was in several very awkward meetings with this person where they were like, you're not performing to my expectations, and this is like really bad, and this is disappointing that you haven't progressed far enough in this project. It was really awkward. And so like that was an unnecessary distraction where I think because it was a larger company that it kind of got lost in translation and no one really knew what to do. It was a large enough company for there to be a gray area. Right? It wasn't like the gray area was one person that's like 10 feet down the cubicles or whatever. I didn't even know where this person was.
That is on your lead. Like, whoever you were directly reporting to at that time allowed that situation to happen. Whether it's a large company, small company, like at their level could have gone to that person and been like, yeah, he's not ready for this, or he's not part of your team. Like, why are you asking? it sounds like someone overstepped and your lead just decided to let it happen, which is weird. But I mean, it happens all the time. And those are the kinds of things I'm really trying to avoid in my team, is like, because I know that it's really weird and awkward and it doesn't make any sense. And like, it could technically like break a team pretty easily, because if all of a sudden someone thinks that they're able to manage your team and these are the people that they can manage on your team and these are the people that they can't, it's just like, who are they reporting to? Why is that happening? And everyone loses direction. Like, everyone's just like, well, I can't go in 16 different directions. Now I'm going to be working on 2 projects at the same time. I can't do that. It sounds like your team lead just kind of dropped the ball on that one.
Well, it kind of sounded like there was also some office politics where they weren't sure who they hired it for and which budget, or, I mean, I'm speculating at this point. But I will also say that this has happened to us in our current web dev agency role, where I was the developer on a project and they had a tech support person where they were supposed to be working with them. And this tech support person got annoyed at the fact that people were constantly contacting them for a technical problem that wasn't a technical problem. It was a problem of they didn't understand how to sign up. And it was sort of like, well, like, all the documentation's there. I've gone through the steps of it repeatedly because I was the technical writer on the project. I've done the steps. Is there anything you want improved on there? No. Okay. So you're just going to have to deal with these emails. Like, that's part of your job. That's your job. You have to deal with these emails. And this person got so annoyed that they started passing their customers' complaints to me. And the reason why I want to bring this up is because I didn't just sit by. I went in and was like, nope, we're not doing that. And I was like, do not send me your customers' requests. I am not working for your customers. I'm working for you. If you have a problem with the technical writing or the problem with this or that, I'll deal with it. But I was like, under no circumstance can you take your job, pass it to me just because you're annoyed at how I did my job at your request. Unbelievably big X. Nope, not doing that. And that's an example of this. That's an unnecessary distraction where it's like, oh, now I'm dealing with their customers. I guess I'll just do that for the same price, right? There's no chance. There's no chance. So sometimes with those unnecessary distractions, you just got to shut it down right away.
Yeah, no, it's a very good point. And putting up those barriers is important. Like, putting up where you draw the line is really key, because if you just keep letting them push the line, they'll just keep pushing. Like, if you wouldn't have said anything, he would have just kept sending you their customers. You would have kept having to do his job for you, and he would have been fine with it. He doesn't care.
Yeah, because it's like they're still getting paid, and absolutely not. It's probably the most like direct thing I've ever done in my career. Looked at this and was like, nope, that's not us. Definitely not us, and I'm not doing that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, next thing here is make mistakes. And this is a tough one because it's your own ego, but one thing that I have learned helps is make mistakes in public inside a company. When you screw up, own up to the mistake. I'm talking again from a team lead perspective, from a management perspective. If you show that it's okay to make mistakes and then show what you've done to resolve them and what you've done to mitigate them in the future, that's going to put people in a place where they're more comfortable with, first of all, admitting mistakes, because that's really important. If you make it so that everyone's scared to admit a mistake, that could lead to severe issues in your infrastructure, in your company, in your security, whatever, because then they can just try to hide it, try to cover it up, and then stuff can actually happen, right, when they notice it. Second of all, if you allow them to make mistakes, they'll go and try things, they'll push the boundaries, they'll find new ways to do things, knowing that they can screw up and fix it and continue moving forward. So you get a better product in the end. And last of all, it's just one of those things where, like, again, if the management shows that they're not godly, like whatever, like no one should believe that anyway. But sometimes, like, if a manager never admits they're wrong, then the employees will have the exact same thought of like, hey, I can't admit that I'm wrong because the manager's never wrong. And then again, that stifles everything. And that makes people feel uncomfortable and stuff like that. So as hard as it is, I think it's important to admit your mistakes very publicly in a company. This is, again, I'm talking from a startup perspective. In a corporate environment, I'm not sure if this is exactly how you would handle it. You probably would want to handle it a little bit differently, maybe to just like your manager or something. I don't know. But in a startup environment, just being actively proactive in like, hey, I screwed this up. This is what I'm doing to implement it, to fix it. And that's really important, is like when you make a mistake, don't just say like, I made a mistake. Say what went wrong, and then already tell them what you're doing to fix it and what you'll be doing next steps to prevent it, right? So like the first step is what you're going to do to fix it immediately. And next step is like how you're going to make sure that this doesn't happen again. Because It's okay to make mistakes, but it's not okay to continue to make the same mistake over and over again. That's the key difference here, right? The last thing here is hire developers that are better than you. So if you are a tech lead and you have the ability to hire, you might want to preserve your right of best developer or something like that. And I think that is a really dumb way to build a team. I think I go out of my way to try to hire people that are better than me in certain things because I can only know so much. And I'm not the best developer in by no means, period. Like I'm just not the best developer. I tried to do my best, but I'm not a genius. I make mistakes. I don't implement things probably correctly sometimes and stuff like that. And hiring people that are better than me, and I notice this in interview processes, like I'm just like, hey, they answered this better than I could answer it. So I'm like, boom, that's a plus for me. That has made me a better developer, obviously, because now I'm learning from them and I know where to put them. Like if they're better at me, like for instance, I'm not the greatest UI UX person, right? Like I'm not super fast at building front ends, right? Like that's not my specialty. Even though I was a front end developer for a long time, a lot of my front end experience has been actually like doing the business logic and connecting to backends. And now I've shifted more to a backend role where I'm doing more infrastructure stuff and I'm doing the API layer and stuff like that. So I'm better at that right now. And I kind of embraced it and I'm okay with it. But I know that I'm not as fast at building like a perfect UI, a responsive UI. So when I was hiring the first person, I saw that his UI skills were like way above mine. Like he knew how to do a ton more responsivity. He was working with Tailwind on a different level than I could work with Tailwind. He was working with UI libraries way better. So I was super excited to hire them because like that means that I can put those tasks on them and they can own it. Again, back to that ownership mentality is like, boom, I found my UI guy. Like I found the guy that can own the UI across all of our platforms. And I gave him that responsibility and he's been killing it. Like our UI infrastructure is amazing where I can go in and I can just pick a component about a library. I can test it with Storybook. I can use it. It makes it easy for me to build now. And now I understand how he's done it. So I've become a better front-end developer. If I would have been like, oh no, I need to protect my role at this company, I need to hire someone worse than me, our apps would have been shit. I'm not going to lie. Like our apps would have been shit. Like I would have done a pretty good job at setting up the infrastructure, but the UI would have probably been like rickety dink, like garbage or something. It's not garbage. Like I definitely can do it. It's just, it's not on this level. So always try to hire people better than you. It's a weird mentality because like, again, you think that they will take your job, but a lot of times they're developers, they're developing, like you're there to lead, right? Like if your role is to bring a team together, it's not to be the best developer. It's to make sure that your team has all the right tools to build the product that you've been assigned to build. That's the goal. And that's the goal that was assigned to me. And that's what I've been trying to do for the company fairly successfully, fingers crossed. But like, it's just how it is. Like this is the last point I had, but it's a tough one because again, like everyone worries about job security. I don't think that should be your first worry in this situation. You should be hiring people that you can learn from, push you to become better, and that fill roles that you can't do. Because again, one person can't do everything.
Well, I wanted to relate your last 2 points, the make mistakes and the hire developers that are better than you, together in this comment, because you were saying, it's okay to make mistakes, but not repeat mistakes. But there are parts of everyone's skill set that are a weak area. And whether it's through, natural talent being in something else or whatever, there's going to be that sort of weak area. And maybe it's not necessarily considered a mistake all the time, but like you're going to kind of like mess something up. Like you always like call the API too much or something like that. Like something like small like that, where even though you've like worked on it and done this, whatever, like you're weak in that area. Like Mike's mentioning the front end developers, the higher developers that are better than you, like Mike kind of hit the nail on the head exactly what I was going to say, was that you really should be looking for somebody that is better at APIs in my example, or is better in UIs and front end development, like than what Mike is saying, because it's a team. So like, as one person isn't good at this, but is good at something else, everyone has their good area. And then hopefully, they all complement and contrast each other, because sometimes it's not necessarily a mistake. It's just a weakness. Like you're not good at, enter in thing here, but that person is great at entering thing here. So therefore you can hire that person, and now you're good at marketing and they're good at front end, or whatever the case may be. It's less of like a mistake and more of just like acknowledging that you have a weakness. And I think, the make mistakes and, avoid future ones kind of point that Mike was making, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be great at everything. Where you make a mistake, you realize, oh shoot, like, I'm bad at marketing. And then you try to get better at it, but you're just bad at marketing. sure, there's the argument of like, you can just get better if you just keep trying. Yeah, but like, unfortunately, there's corporate deadlines and things got to get done, and you can't be good at absolutely everything. So instead of, constantly making those mistakes, one way to avoid it is not for you to just suddenly get amazing at it, is to hire someone that is good at the marketing side of things or at the UI side of things in Mike's example. That's a way to avoid your own mistake of like, okay, that's it. This person's going to handle this from now on. This other person's going to handle this from now on, because these mistakes or these shortcomings have to be sort of filled. And it's not always just a matter of, okay, just skill up, just get better. That's not necessarily realistic, just in terms of like, I guess, human skill and natural talent, but it's also unrealistic for you to be good at absolutely every single area.
I enjoy knowing that I'm not the best one on the team. That's another thing for me. I kind of like that I can ask other people questions and they'll answer them for me. If I was the best developer on the team, then that would have been harder. Like, I wouldn't be able to trust that. So I'm learning a lot in this role. It's been a super interesting and challenging role for me to grow the team myself and to hire and to go through that process while building at the same time. It's not easy. The balance between the two has been a learning process, like very difficult to get in a rhythm with coding while you have to do a bunch of management tasks. It's not easy. I've gotten a little bit better at it. I have like set days where I know I have full days of coding. I have set blocks of time during days that I do have meetings, and set blocks of time where I have coding time. So like that's helped a lot, like setting that up and getting everyone on board with that as well, and making sure that everyone understands it and they're not expecting you to answer right away during those times is important. But it's fun. Like if you're the type of person that wants to make everyone around you better, then this is the role for you, like team lead, tech lead. That's a really cool role to be in. Maybe that brings you into a more manager position later on. Maybe you realize that you like the coding better, whatever. I would encourage everyone to at least try it to see if they like it. And I hope that the lessons aren't just for people that are going to become tech leads, but for people that are onboarding onto teams, that there are different ways to do things. And if you see it from their level, maybe you'll understand a little bit more why they're doing certain things. So that's what I'm hoping I got out of this episode. But other than that, I don't really have anything else to say. Matt, do you have any other final remarks?
No, I think that's it. I think we've covered it well, and hopefully these tips can help you, decide whether you want to do some more management. If you are kind of stepping into a tech lead role with some management, some tech, hopefully these in particular helped you, because that's kind of what Mike is doing in his startup role right now. But I think that basically concludes this episode. I don't have my Patreon document up, so I'm just going to have some awkward silence unless we have some, I don't know, Mike, tell the folks some fun stuff.
This felt good. React bad.
My Patreon documents list just caught fire. But anyway, remember, if you want to support the show, you can do so by going to patreon.com/HTML, all the things. Check out the tiers and give that a go. Many thanks to our $3 tier patrons. Tim from the Web Hacker on thewebhacker.com. Jason from Geek Life Radio via geekliferadio.com. Fire and Season via fireandseason.com. Garrett Segal, Level Up Financial Planning via www.levelupfinancialplanning.com. And Joshua via silvio.us. Remember, we also have a Scrimba affiliate link. If you want to learn how to code with their interactive media player code editor, go check out our link in the show description, as well as on htmlallthethings.com. And last but not least, we'd like to give a shout out to Michael Laraka, a contributing author on htmlallthethings.com. Michael is the author of Self-Taught, the X Generation blog at selftaughttxg.com. Feel free to leave a comment or a review in the platform that you are listening to this on, and this outro will sign us off.
You've been listening to HTML All the Things Podcast. Web development, web design, and small business. We hope you've gotten some useful and practical information from this show. And we hope you appreciate that we talk to you like human beings. And we hope you had some fun. We'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit us up on social media on Facebook, Instagram, and Patreon at HTML All the Things. And on Twitter at HTML Everything. Until next time, this is HTML All the Things, signing off.